we actually have to talk about this Tim Tool, David Pakman conversation because it was actually very good. Now, I already did a video on this where I broke down, I think it's titled something like David Pakman pummels Tim Pool into Beanie Oblivion. Very funny title, of course, keeping it real, keeping it straight shooting, you know what I'm saying? And that was a pretty good video going into like the first half of it. So you should go check that out. I definitely recommend it. But this is another part, and this was a highlight clip that was uploaded by David Pakman on his channel. And it was fascinating because Tim Pool, and I want to credit Tim Pool. I'm not trying to, my goal here is not to push Tim Pool away from what he just did here, because he admits and he agrees with David Pakman that his previous take was actually false and off. And that's great. You know what I'm saying? Awesome. That's really cool. And I hope that, he continues to be somebody who at least acts. I like this. I don't know. I want to say honest, but I can't say that with a straight face. But, hopefully he continues to act this way. So we got this video here. This is super interesting. And there's also one point that I really want to get into depth about because it's actually really interesting, and I was thinking, wow, how would this come down? So we are going to check out this video. I did cut out some words which were AS. I'm not trying to get demonetized, so got to keep that word out, but just know that that's the words that are always being cut.
Restrict a public accommodation based on protected characteristics. If someone quotes a verse from the Quran, Twitter can remove that.
Okay, you're saying at the individual level or through an algorithm that is meant to identify ISIS members?
Like Twitter, a Twitter employee has the First Amendment and Section 230 right to say anything pertaining to this protected class we can remove because Twitter is a speech platform.
But that's the thing. So here's where I think, and I don't know if we're talking past.
So the claim that Tim Pool was making was like, oh, dude, like Twitter says that they can just ban someone for being any of the protected classes. Now, what are some of the protected classes? The protected classes that exist. You cannot, in public accommodations, you cannot discriminate based on race, gender, sexual orientation, and religion is also another one of those. So those are the protected classes. Maybe we're missing one or two, but I think that's pretty much it. And so he was saying that, Twitter argued that it literally can ban people based on their identity, despite the fact that there's civil rights. And that there are non-discrimination laws and statutes that exist in the United States, specifically the Civil Rights Act. And so that's obviously very false, and that'll be pointed out here.
Past each other, or if we actually disagree about what the policy is, or if we're just misunderstanding what the policy is. What I'm saying is I have seen no evidence, nor any legal opinion, nor have I seen Twitter say that they believe they could have a policy that says we do not allow, for example, Jews on Twitter, and that would be legal.
So let's try and bring it to the real world.
Okay.
The way you're describing it would be that McDonald's says, no, Jews are allowed in the store. We just refuse to sell them cheeseburgers.
No, that's not how that works because. And this is a problem, right? Is you can't analogize this. I don't think it's analogize. You can't analogize this to other things because it gets intricate here. And I've always hated analogies for this reason is because, and conservatives love analogies for some reason. It's really weird where they think that they can, analogize an issue like healthcare into like sprinkles on an ice cream or something like that. And it's like, this is like rainbow sprinkles and that's like chocolate sprinkles. Like, what is this? And so no, that definitely is not an apt comparison because what he's describing here is he's saying that no, like McDonald's could say, no, we are letting Jews in, but they just can't order, we won't serve them cheeseburgers. No, that's not the same thing at all. That would be clearly in violation of the Civil Rights Act because you can't do that because you're discriminating based on a protected class. You cannot refuse service to someone based on any of those things. And if you're doing that to only Jews, where you're saying, hey, we're not going to serve you any Jews cheeseburgers, but anybody else, you got it, buddy. No, that's not legal. You can't do that. So, and that isn't, and David Pakman's going to break this down here as to why that's not an apt comparison and why he's actually wrong in his analysis of the argumentation that Twitter was presenting in this case.
You see what I mean? The point of Twitter.
I'm not sure that that's the right analogy.
So let's check it out. Twitter is a platform where you can express your thoughts.
Okay.
You can go on and you can. Otherwise, what are you really doing? Nothing. Like, there's literally, that's all Twitter does. Twitter has a First Amendment and Section 230 argument where they say, whatever it is you say, we can remove it for any reason. And the judge asked, are you saying you could remove someone even if it would be discriminatory based on religion or gender? And the response from Twitter's lawyers was yes.
Right. So that I think you're misunderstanding that testimony. And there's a page that follows it, or a sequence that follows it, that I think is very illuminating. I'll just give an example, and maybe the analogy will allow us to move forward on this. Imagine that Twitter wants to. I mean, let's just take the one from we were talking about earlier. Twitter wants to enforce a ban on content.
Yes,
okay,
content.
Let's imagine that that's something Twitter decided they were going to do. Content on Twitter is not equally balanced between men and women. We don't even have to argue about what the split is, but we would just agree it's very unlikely that it's 50-50 or 50.3 and 49.7 the way that men and women exist in society. Content on Twitter is not evenly balanced between right-wingers and left-wingers. An ADL study says 71% is right-wing. Number doesn't matter. You might disagree with the number, but let's just imagine it's not evenly distributed. What Twitter is asserting is, if indeed 71% of content comes from right-wingers, we are going to be disproportionately removing the content of and banning conservatives or right-wingers or whatever term you want to use. Twitter is not saying we would legally be able to say, no, imagine that they're white conservatives, just for our argument, because we got to add a protected class. Twitter's not saying if we wanted to ban all white conservatives from Twitter, we would be allowed to do it. That would violate a very specific non-discrimination law. What they are saying is that if the practice of content disproportionately targets people who happen to be white, as long as we're not removing people for being white, that is legal, and I agree that that's legal.
Right, so that breakdown is super on point. Basically, the origins of this whole argument, I think, was that there were some Muslims who were being like mistakenly picked up in the algorithm when they were trying to take out IS content on Twitter, and so some innocent Muslims who weren't partaking in that would get swept up in the policy. And he was saying that Twitter was arguing that like that's fine, despite it breaking the rules of discrimination based on protected classes. But as David explains there, he's saying basically that they're not specifically going after someone for being Muslim. They have a policy that's going to end up disproportionately affecting one group, and that doesn't mean that it's based on one of the protected classes. It's just that they have a policy, they're trying to stop certain things, and because those aren't equal splits, there's an unequal distribution, which means naturally there's going to be an unequal distribution of bans on the either diametric opposites of who's doing it right versus left, conservative, liberal, whatever you want to put it as. And so Twitter wasn't arguing like, nah, yeah, dog, like we can just ban anybody even if they're protected class, and even if that protected class we're banning them based on that, and therefore civil rights law, we're exempt from civil rights law. That's not how as David broke it down, that's not how it works.
That's a really interesting, that's a good point. That's a really good point. What we're seeing now, I think, with the digital space is that we've actually got a distinction between people as thoughts and the thoughts related to certain characteristics and identities.
I never thought I'd say this. But Tim Pool actually makes a super interesting point here. And this is a bit of a lead up. This is a bit of a beginning to a lead up. Where something I was like, wow, this is actually very interesting. So I want to get to that. Again, I never thought I'd say that my entire life.
The individual themselves and their identity. Because I think by your explanation, and again, I think it's a good point, Twitter couldn't actually ban someone for being gay because they're banning the speech specifically, right?
No,
like if someone, so I'll put it this way: if someone was gay and made a post talking about the things they do as a gay person, Twitter could ban them, right?
Well, I guess if they had a policy that said that you can't talk about gay things, I don't know.
So this is actually what's interesting to me. This got me thinking. I was like, wow, how would this pan out? Now, I don't know if there's ever been a case like this before or not, but, could Twitter instate a policy in which they go, if you are straight and you want to talk about, reaming the fuck out of your girlfriend last night and going balls deep, leaving the nuts hanging out, and they have a policy where they say, that's okay, but if you talk about fucking your husband last night, that's not okay. I'm curious. I think that should, if that were to ever come to an actual case where they were to institute a policy like that, I think that should be deemed to be in violation of one of the, of the protected classes clause, because at that point you are discriminating based upon you're not allowing one of the services based upon their identity. Now, if you wanted to take out, let's say for example, you wanted to take out all sexual content off your platform because you want to make it clean or whatever, that's not discriminatory in any way towards any different protected classes. So that's fine. But if you have it open for that kind of content, would you be able to instate a policy where you say no gay sexual content, only straight? I don't think so. I think if that were to happen, I think that should be deemed in violation of the Civil Rights Act, and I forget if it's an extension of the Civil Rights Act or if they had another law passed for that to add sexual orientation and gender and the others into the protected classes. But I do think that should be in violation of civil rights, and I think they should they should actually do that. But this is a whole different story because you're talking about instituting a policy that disproportionately affects one group, but they're not specifically removing that person for being part of that group.
No, I'm saying, like, from a legal standpoint, based on the First Amendment argument, that Twitter's under no obligation to support the speech of anyone else, right? So if you're saying so let's Twitter does have a policy that bans hate speech, which means because, like you said, it's predominantly coming from one side, they predominantly get banned. Yeah. And we're speaking hypothetically because I don't know the numbers, but for the sake, it's again, I think it's a good point. It's something I hadn't realized. There is going to be a distinction between the individual's identity and the ideas. The ideas don't have an identity.
Right. So are you agreeing that you
see, now there's an interesting thing though, and I think Tim Pool's onto something here. That is an interesting question because, like, again, think about it, right? Let's say Twitter institutes a ban on any gay content but allows the straight content. I think that is discriminatory. So that's actually something interesting that you brought up.
Twitter claims they can ban people on the basis of protected classes was not an accurate reading.
I think you're correct, but I do want to clarify. I think what we're actually seeing is that there are certain ideas associated with identity politics.
Yes.
And that Twitter has the ability to remove ideas around certain groups that are specific to that group. For instance,
I agree.
So again, that's actually very interesting. And again, I want to repeat. I never thought that I would have something that was such fruit for thought coming from Tim Pool, but certainly it is, and that's something very interesting. So let me know your thoughts on that down below, actually, about that hypothetical. But what's important here is that Tim Pool had gotten it wrong. David Pakman broke down why he was wrong, and that his claim that Twitter had argued that they would be able to ban people based on their identity, which would be in violation of the Civil Rights Act, and that they're effectively exempt from the Civil Rights Act, was actually false. So let me know your thoughts on that down below. I found this to be absolutely fascinating.